lunchtime presentations today on leveraging AI, which I know I've been trying to get up to speed on myself, and I think is probably relevant for everyone on here, what this really means as far as efficiencies, effectiveness, and of course the risk that comes with it. So I'm really proud to introduce one of our sponsors, Quarles and Brady. We definitely appreciate their support. And today we have on this topic Christina Snyder, who's a partner at Quarles and Brady, Christopher Emerson, who's the Chief Legal Operations and Innovation Officer at Quarles, Kristen Zust, Director of Pricing and Practice Economics at Quarles, and also Laura Vega, who's the Associate General Counsel and Senior Director of Legal Affairs for Terumo Neuro. So with that, I will turn it over to the team. So thank you again for your support. And Quarles team, did you want to have people just go ahead and ask questions as you go, or would you prefer that it be in like the chat function?
It would be great if people would put those questions in the chat function and we'll address them at the end when we have time.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. Turn it over to you folks.
Great. Well, we are very happy to be here. It's a very exciting time in the land of AI. And so we're going to talk about these, we're going to cover these areas today. I've flashed the agenda on the screen. First, we're going to talk about the big picture. Why are we here? What are we doing with AI, generative AI in particular? And what problems can it solve and how? How does the tech work? What are the guardrails? How do they impact income? And then we'll double back to understanding the big picture again. Now, that's a lot. Not only is that a lot, but if you have been watching the news over the past 6 to 12 months, you know that a lot has happened in AI and it's happening exponentially and the laws are changing every day. And I do not need to take a poll of how many people have seen that people have been sanctioned in court for putting in wrong citations and briefs, because I know we've all seen that, we're all watching that. So we have a lot to cover, but we're not going to be able to get into great detail with every single thing. So what I discovered after we signed up to do this presentation is that the ACC has put together an amazing resource, amazing materials that are on their website, and they have really great in-depth rules, regulations, resources, and things that you can look at, and ethical internal guidelines that you can create. I mean, they have samples. It's fantastic. We cannot cover all of that in an hour. So I'm just going to tell you, ACC is fantastic and they've got a lot of great stuff there. So please be sure to use their resources as well. Another point, another important overall point, this is a tech CLE. It's not the ethics CLE, so it's not going to be very law heavy. What we're talking about today is how you can use AI in your profession, how it can help in-house counsel, how it can help you relate to your outside counsel, and what you can do in the future. And right now it's evolving so quickly, you'll hear a lot about that later. It's evolving so quickly that it would not serve you well for us to say, here are the 10 use cases that we have, go try them out right now and just do that. We are also going to talk about what you need to do now to lay the foundation for the future so that you can use AI productively and effectively as time goes on. So that's an overarching theme. You'll hear it multiple times today. We're laying foundation for the future because AI has not fully arrived yet. So I take a moment and look at this slide. I actually asked OpenAI to generate a slide for me. You'll see the prompt below, and yes, I did it all in lowercase, so I was true to what my prompt was. I asked OpenAI to create a picture describing different perspectives on generative AI, and this is what it came up with. And I suspect that all of us lawyers are in one of those boxes every day, and we probably fluctuate from day to day as well. Is it going to destroy the world, or is it the savior of humanity? It probably depends on what you're working on that day. But there's a lot of information out there, and there are a lot of perspectives about what it can do for us. Today, we're going to be very practical about what you can actually use in your toolkit and what you can actually use in the future and lay the foundation, again, for the future. And with that, I will turn it over to our innovation officer, Chris Emerson, to talk about what problems can AI solve and how.
Thank you, Christina. You mind advancing? Okay, so this is kind of how I tend to think about it. I'm old enough to have been working in legal as a software developer in 1998. And in many ways, this feels like the internet did at that point in time. Um, there are definitely things that we can be doing with AI today, just like there were things we could be doing with building intranet resources, intranet applications, internet applications, but by the same token, if you think about, does your organization still use anything that was created in 1998? The answer is almost certainly no. We couldn't have imagined, the tools that we have today with the internet that back in 1998. And the same is going to be true of AI. One of the things that I thought was analogous is, back in 1998, as an organization, we realized, that we needed to focus on, um, digitizing our different information assets, right? I mean, there was no way you could put a piece of paper on an intranet or on an internet site, so you had to digitize everything. And one of the things we're going to be talking today about is what do you need to be doing with those same information assets in order to make them useful to AI? So there's really two different things, just like there were in 1998, that I think we need to be focused on. What can we be doing today? What kinds of tools do we have available? How can they be used to create efficiencies, create value for our organizations? But way more importantly, what do we need to be doing with our information to make it more useful to us down the road? How do we prepare for the future correctly? Go ahead. I think, yep, there we go. So in terms of preparing for the future, a lot of it is what I just said. How do we take the information that we have as an organization and stage it in a way that it can be useful for AI? That, you think about the information inside your organization. If your goal, say, is I want to be able to leverage AI as an additional FTE or many FTEs, and then you think about, well, how does it know about my organization? How can it answer questions correctly? How can it do things for me? If it doesn't have access to any of your information, it's not going to be able to do that well. So, this is information that is in your databases. It's information in all of your documents. Potentially, it's information and access to stuff in your email. It's all of your informational assets. It's a challenge. It's thinking about how do we transform this information. We're going to talk about that a lot more as well. If you want to go ahead and switch to the next slide. But there's plenty of current use cases. Now, to Christina's point about, I think none of us want to be sanctioned. None of us want to make the news because we've done something wrong with AI. I think that one of the most important things is, figuring out, A, what is it good at? What is it bad at? When are you drifting into riskier territory? Are there tools, existing tools out there from third-party vendors that are already constructed in a way to eliminate or reduce the amount of risk? So if you're thinking about legal drafting as an example, to me, that's a higher risk use case, particularly if you're saying with a tool that is not designed for legal, a general purpose AI tool. Go out and draft a legal brief for me. Use the internet as the source of your information. You've just walked into very, very high risk territory, which is why, we've seen the cases on the news that we have. But there's plenty of things that you could be doing today. There's some that we've been experimenting with, like leveraging AI to find inconsistencies in depositions, doing deposition summaries, again, using them within legal-oriented tools that reduce the risks that are involved, always reviewing what it's bringing back. You can use it to create matter descriptions, giving it access to the information within the matters and being able to summarize what's going on in there. Now, none of that should be done on autopilot. You need to have some idea of what reality is. You shouldn't just be trusting that it can do it on its own. All of this goes back to trust but verify. In transactional work, we've experimented with it being able to do math against financial terms within different, contracts or leases or agreements. It can do math. It didn't used to be able to do math. Now it can. Another one that we've looked at, this one is still in development. We're trying to perfect it, but for a long time, we've been using a third-party vendor to draft IP office action skeletons. This isn't the argument. This is just the skeleton of the document, the claims, what the basis of the rejections were from the examiner, and constructing essentially the skeletal shell of that document that then, the arguments go into. We've discovered that we can do that at a tiny fraction of the cost with AI, but then you get into some hard elements of it, like formatting of the document, claims indentation. Can AI actually see the indentation that it's supposed to have? Or things like AI does not like grammatical errors. So if the inventors had a grammatical error in the claims, AI is going to want to correct that. Or if it doesn't believe that a word is a word, if it's in an emerging like biochem or in areas of technology where it's inventing new words, new language to express, AI may not know those words and it's going to try to correct them. And so you've got to have mechanisms in place to make sure that that isn't happening. Just to give you a couple of practical examples there. Laura, I think or no, it goes to Christian.
And so if we move on to the next slide, you may be wondering why they have a pricing guy involved in the conversation about artificial intelligence. And part of the reason is to illustrate the point that you don't need to be very technical to have artificial intelligence really help you out today, and be thinking about what can you do so that you can be in those meetings like the ones that we're seeing right here. This is where everyone wants to be on this slide, right? Where you're setting the strategy and seeing how the way that you've set your team to implement that strategy has impacted the strategic goals of your organization. And that's where we all want to be. And if you go to the next slide, however, this is where very often we find ourselves. And part of the reason that I'm here is I'm somewhat of a kindred spirit to what I understand goes on in law departments very often, which is we have these ideas and we want to be focused on the more strategic elements of our job where we add more value and we know we can do more. But the practical realities of what we need to be involved in day to day to make sure that the organization is proceeding safely, or in my case, is proceeding in a way that conveys value to clients, but still puts the firm in decent financial footing, it makes my desk look more like this. Every time a client asks for a rate adjustment or a flat fee or whatever it may be, the pricing department in some way, shape, or form has to get involved. And so very frequently, we have piles of paper on our desk that mean that because we have to be in the workflow and we have to help our attorneys and make sure that the firm is safe and there's value to the client, the paper never stops piling. And so it's really tough to get yourself into an area where you have this space to align yourself with the meeting from the slide before. And a lot of what's going on in artificial intelligence, and you'll hear Chris talk a little bit about it in a few minutes, is giving us an opportunity not to replace ourselves, but to insert a virtual, let's call it a virtual teammate, into the process to free up that space so that we can focus on those areas where we're actually adding value in the process, but at the same time letting that process move a little bit more smoothly and independently of the areas where we're not really adding a bunch to it. So if we go on to the next slide, I had mentioned that anytime somebody from a client were to say, can I get a flat fee? Can I get a reduction in legal fees temporarily? Can you do this project for that amount of money? The pricing team becomes involved. And this right here is the process that we had in Quarles before AI was able to come in and help us smooth things a little bit. And it's held together somewhat by, let's call it, bubblegum and tongue depressors, and not because whoever helped set this process up didn't know what they were doing, or that our attorneys aren't really good at reaching out and liaising with pricing, but because you work with what you have. And the resources that we have are only available at certain times, and have access to different systems, et cetera. And so you have a really convoluted process to do something pretty simple. Christina calls and says, Christian, I need a budget. You wouldn't think there's 8 bullets that need a whole bunch of coordination and me going out and doing algebra against information from disparate systems, but that is how it works. And I imagine there's a lot of analogs inside the law department. Perhaps you're trying to work on something strategic and a contract comes in, and you have to review it and get it out today because it's important and it has implications on your quarterly sales. And so it can be disruptive, and AI can help smooth. I don't add a whole bunch of value where I'm running basic algebra, or when I'm pulling data from a number of systems that the attorneys don't interact with very much or may not have access to. But I do add value when it comes to looking things over at the end and saying, Christina, have you thought about maybe changing the team composition just a little bit? And that might help get us into the client's budget. So if we move on to the next slide. I sat down with some members of Chris's team, and in the course of a day, we came up with essentially these boards right here. And this isn't automating me out of a job. This is automating pieces of my job where I'm going out into those disparate systems. We're talking to attorneys and basically trying to get the same 6 data points to get us started every single time. And if we move to the next slide, what it was able to do in not very much time was to enable somebody to interact with our artificial intelligence and just write, I would like to use these people on my team. Here's how long I think it's going to take, and here's some various characteristics of the matter. Can you let me know what that budget is going to look like? And it responds conversationally. You can iterate with the pricing agent. The pricing agent is available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's also available to multiple people at once. These are all limitations to me and to the process that I was oftentimes somebody that could be holding up. And now I'm not. I only have to come in when we get to a place that needs that supervisory layer to make sure that whatever we're doing conveys value, but at the same time makes the firm safe and on solid financial footing. And so if we move on to the next slide, I'm not suggesting that everybody jumps to budgeting for artificial intelligence, but what I am suggesting is we're getting to a point where AI is not just answering questions for us. AI can begin to start doing things and smoothing out processes that are cobbled together right now. And so again, I work in pricing, I deal with budgets all of the time, and on more than one occasion, I've worked with in-house counsel who's saying, hey, I have a litigation portfolio and you are a part of that portfolio. Every quarter, we want to take a look at what happened last quarter, how that aligned with those assumptions that we had in our budget. We want to know what is going to happen in next quarter, and is the budget for next quarter impacted? And discreetly, that's not very difficult if you only have 1 or 2 or 3 cases, but oftentimes you have portfolios. And so you have maybe 10, 15, 20 or more counsel that you're dealing with and trying to aggregate this information, synthesize it, and then report it up to whoever needs to take action based on whatever the firm's reported back to you. This is perhaps a process that could benefit from an agent of your own that can help smooth out the pieces, like aggregating and synthesizing and trying to make a single sensical document out of 30 different responses that you get at different times. And so really think of some of your initial opportunities at taking situations that tend to be high volume. That's where I would look first. And then a big bonus if those high volume processes feel harder than they should right now. Oftentimes we can take some of the clunkiness out and help to smooth, using artificial intelligence, those areas where the human involvement isn't actually adding a whole bunch of value, but needs to be done. And so that's one thing we've done at the firm amongst many opportunities that we have. And I imagine there are many analogs inside of law departments, and Laura's going to talk a little bit about what she's doing now.
Well, I love everything I've heard so far, and from an in-house perspective, obviously getting budgets that are certainly more accurate and faster, and the pricing tool. This panel is fabulous from an in-house perspective because, as we all know, when you're in-house, you are tasked with many, 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 many things and very little time to get them done. And when we are talking about modernizing legal departments and law firms, we are certainly modernizing the in-house team. And so how do you do that, right? Because there isn't a lot of FTEs or resources to do it. So we've really, at least at Terumo Neuro, which is a very innovative medical device company, specializing in neuroendovascular space, many of our devices are used in very sensitive procedures treating stroke and aneurysm. So from a company perspective, we're absolutely looking at efficiencies and how to modernize. At this point, most of our manufacturing is all done by people, so we don't use a lot of robotics. But we are an AI first law department. And what that means for us is we've decided that we are tasked, and I love that Christina mentioned the AI toolbox, the ACC AI toolbox, which we have used, but we are tasked with the governance. So what procedures are we going to put in place? We certainly have a high level AI use policy, but as we get more granular and we think more globally, our decision was to first use a lot of AI in our legal department and understand the use cases, and then be somewhat subject matter experts as we go forward. So what that looks like, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about it and happy to answer questions later more specifically, but what it looks like for us, and we've heard a lot of it already, is find the tasks that are easily either kind of brought online or easily used by AI. So things like creating presentations, right? So at my company, we do have Copilot, and we do have our specific instance of Copilot. So we don't have concerns with data being, either, uploaded or used in Copilot. So we do a lot with Copilot. So whether that's meeting summaries and presentations, or it's, what product line was launched when and who's managing that team. I've found that Copilot is really great. So we have both the web version, and then we have the what we call the intranet, right, or the internal version. So that's been super helpful. And then generally, we use AI, like many of you do, and a lot of law firms do. So we're using it through Westlaw, right? AI research tools. So write me a research memo on this specific, discrete legal issue. We certainly use outside counsel when necessary, but a lot of the time now we're using it as a summer type associate, so who can do a very fundamental, here's a memo on the real high level issues that you need to be considering. We then take that and then make some, strategic decisions on, okay, is this an offensive strategy or is it a defensive strategy? Where do we go from here? We also use contract management systems. There are many out there, all of which at this point either have or say that they have an AI component. And we have one in particular that I launched about almost 2.5 years ago. And so we are doing first run reviews, and the panel already talked about this, first run contract reviews, where we can get a decent red line on a somewhat standard template, right? You start to deviate, and that's when we're going to have issues. But if it's our standard, what we call product side by side, so manufacturing type product buy agreement or a services agreement, that gives our business the ability, and we enable our business stakeholders to use the tool to run a first draft and then to start their commercial review while we're beginning our legal review. So that's been, a huge improvement in turnaround times. So contracts that typically take, 3 days to 3 weeks are now, our average turnaround times have decreased, on average, probably at least 10 to 30%. So those are just some great current use cases. I would love to talk all day about the many things that AI I think can do for us. And I will say, I liked the first slide where, there's a responsible use part of it. And if you look globally, depending on the country, it's either we want to be first or we don't care if we're first as long as we're doing it right. So I think our company is somewhere, and most companies are somewhere in the middle, where our integrity is our brand, and we have devices that go into people's brains, and so we have to be very careful and very tactical. You know, we look back to 1998. We are looking at some of the missteps that went on with the internet, and in life sciences, for example, and we don't want to make those mistakes again. So what are we going to do to make sure that we're doing it in a very ethical, but in a very mission-driven, you know, helping patients? So I'll stop there. There's many things I think we'll get to.
That's great. And now we're going to talk about how does the tech work? And I have been learning this a lot in the last couple of months. I still don't have a comprehensive understanding, of course. For that, we will defer to our coder, Chris Emerson.
Yep, if you want to go ahead and switch. Okay, so I'm not going to start at what is an LLM. I mean, that has been around now for a couple of years in sort of all of our consciousness. But if you do think back to kind of where did it start, it was not dissimilar to just an incredibly smart chatbot, right? What really started to change though, and you know, you've probably heard the word agent. Sometimes it's called an assistant. You know, different providers call this different things. But really what changed is the introduction of AI tools. That's kind of what tends to differentiate that original, you know, super smart chatbot from an agent or an assistant, is the AI has the ability to have tools and call those tools automatically based upon the question you ask. And tools can be pretty much anything. I mean, they could be the ability to search the internet. They could be the ability to scrape content off of a web page. They could be the ability to run a search against an internal database index. It could be the ability to do a query. It could be the ability to put content inside of one of your systems. It could be just about anything. Anything that you can code can be a tool. One thing to know, though, this is an emerging thing about tools, is there's now a lot of movement towards tool standardization. The specific standard is called MCP, Model Context Protocol. OpenAI, Microsoft, lots and lots and lots of the big tech vendors are now rallying around this, but this is around a standard by which third parties can create tools that you can consume. And you know, this could be like the ability to have your AI have a tool that enables it to book a flight for you or a hotel. With Microsoft, you have the ability to hook up a tool that connects to the Azure environment, and then you can ask any question you want if you're an IT person about your Azure environment, or create new resources in it. The standard is already contemplating security, but it's also already contemplating payment processing. So this is going to be an important thing for you guys as you begin to think about how your AI strategy starts to intersect with the larger world. And if you're a company that offers services all across the internet, this may be something on the business generation side that your organization is thinking about beginning to create MCP tools for your customers' AI agents to be able to consume. So that's kind of a big emerging area with a lot of movement lately. Beyond that, the other thing that's been starting to occur, and you see it now in more like ChatGPT for certain has it, but is the concept of AI memory, and that it's able to now store, you know, interactions with you, but then remember them across interactions. And that's kind of a big deal. I mean, it makes you, you know, you need to be a bit more mindful in some instances about what you're asking, or if you have to include things in your prompt to say disregard, because it's going to start to try to create correlations, maybe, you know, in ways that you don't intend, because this is early days around AI memory as well. I've seen it in some of my queries. If I'm working on one problem and then I switch to a different problem, sometimes that memory will, juxtapose the two problems I'm trying to solve, and I'll wind up at an incorrect answer place. So just something to be mindful of. And, it definitely forms a basis for its impression of you. One of the things that's sometimes humorous is to ask it, to maybe have it ask, write a bio of its impressions of you for you. Like, write a bio about me based upon our interactions together, and see what it generates about you. It's always, it's entertaining, if nothing else. Beyond that, we talked earlier about, preparing for the future and getting your data ready, right? So, we're really early into this, but this is something that you need to be focusing on. I would say from an effort perspective, it's way more important right now for you to be focusing on how you're going to organize and make available your internal information to AI than it is about coding specific solutions around AI. Kind of going back to what I said, regarding 1998, and none of us are probably using any application, and I'm sorry if you are still, that you wrote back in 1998. But the data that you had available, the digitized data, now that probably still exists in your organization and still has some value, recognizing it's 30 plus years later. But the coding itself is not. And given the pace of change in AI, the most important thing I would say about coding is be prepared to pivot. Anything that we wrote, back then, state of the art has changed so much that you would never use code like that anymore. And that's really what's going on right now with AI as well, is stuff that we wrote last year is now obsolete. I mean, the pace of change is such that, a year later, all of a sudden, the entire approach you took may be obsolete. So data and organizing your data and orchestrating your data, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, is probably the most important focus for the moment, if you want to switch to the next one. So what we're using at Quarles around orchestration is Microsoft's Fabric tools. I know there's other vendors that have similar capabilities, but we're a Microsoft shop, and so that's what this one is. But Fabric is basically a cloud-based lake house with a ton of tools around being able to organize, clean up, and transform your data. And our goal was to look at all of the law firm's data and figure out, how do we make this, AI accessible? How do we preserve the underlying data security rules that were in those source systems? How do we respect the ethical walls that we have to have in place? How do we respect your outside counsel guidelines if they suggest or indicate a particular posture around data reuse, or use of AI in any way, shape, or form around it? And that's why I call this orchestration tools, because this is, the framework by which we bring up our data and all of those considerations and organize it and secure it in such a way that when AI does have access to it, it's doing it with all of that context in mind. It enables you to not only pull up the data into this cloud-based environment, but then be able to push data in any which way you need it to be pushed. You want to go ahead and switch to the next slide. This just gives you kind of an example, pipeline workflow in which we're copying up a bunch of data, but then we have a notebook at the end that transforms it. In this particular case, it's our legal manual. It's all of our internal policy and process documentation. It's all text, and so we bring the text up, but then we use a notebook at the end to transform that text into something that AI can make use of. If you want to go ahead and move to the next one. So we don't have a great visual beyond this one of this, but at Quarles, what we've chosen to use to create, what we're calling an AI database is a knowledge graph. A knowledge graph is just a specialized type of database. It's not like a SQL database. It's different. its real strength is being able to capture the relationships between two pieces of information and codify them. And then that basis enables you to then create context around all of that information. So, what we're doing when we're bringing up all of our information from our different systems, including other third-party cloud-based systems like our IP docketing system, is we can not only copy this data into it and secure it, but we can connect all of that information, which creates a tremendous amount of context that helps us, reduce and prevent the likelihood of AI hallucination. So in this example here, you've got me in the middle, but this is me then connected to tons of different information coming from different systems. All the ones that look like they have dates around them, that's all coming from our financial reporting system. I have a web bio, and so my bio's in there, and it's extracting concepts about me from my bio, what trade associations I'm a member of, where I went to school, just all kinds of information about me and connecting me with it. One of the interesting and useful ways, to imagine a knowledge graph is, generally speaking, all the circles are what they call nodes and all the lines are what they call relationships, but they're sentences. Chris Emerson, is a member of the College of Law Practice Management, right, as an example. So you've got, noun, direct object, and then you've got the relationship, which is the verb between them. So you can think about it as sentences, and AI, really understands this concept very well, and it's capable of querying knowledge graphs directly. We don't have to code all the ways that and how AI queries this database does not have to be coded in advance. It knows how to write its own queries to be able to pull up information from this system. If you want to go ahead and switch to the next slide. Beyond, creating our own tools, like you guys, we're also looking at the third-party legal marketplace for good AI tools. Our marketplace looks a little bit different than yours. The Thomson Reuters, Latera, Harvey, these are all, name brand solutions for a law firm. And when it comes to substantive legal work, these are the types of solutions that law firms tend to be looking at if we're trying to do, litigation work, drafting, if we're trying to do transactional work, contract review. These are the tools that we tend to be looking at, and it's what reduces the risk for us in terms of hallucination.
And so when you have the right tools and you have your data make your artificial intelligence, let's just call it organizationally aware, right? There's an awareness not only about how Quarles operates, but then even the individuals from within it, you have a real opportunity. And that's to bring the technology to people where they work and how they prefer, or even how they interpret things around them. And so a quick example on that is Christina may say, what does this unit of work cost to the pricing agent? And what Christina would probably be thinking there when she said cost would be, what is this going to cost my client? What should I tell them? If I asked, what is this going to cost? It's a very different question. I'm probably asking, what does this cost the firm to perform? And so just understanding that simple distinction between the same word based on roles can make things more powerful. But beyond that, beyond the real simple application I just said, it also can help you instruct virtualized project managers how and when to interact with somebody, what their preference is. For instance, anybody who knows me knows that you probably don't want to put the most important thing that I'm going to do all day in front of me at 7 in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee. I'm just not a morning person. We have the ability, again, not only to take it to users where they are, but how they prefer. And so when we were at Quarles starting to look for people who could be the guinea pigs for those types of preferences, not only to make sure that you show people, for instance, only the data they should see and maintain ethical walls, et cetera, but help them work the way that they prefer and enhance their experience, I raised my hand very, very quickly. I've been working with Chris for over a decade, And so he knows me really well, and his team should have very easily, in my mind, been able to enhance my experience. If we go into the next slide, this, however, is what I woke up to when they decided to, air quote, enhance my experience. And while they got a laugh out of it, they also told our large language model, they also told it that I was going to try to get around these rules. And so not only was this playing a joke on me, which I think Chris and his entire team enjoyed doing, but beyond that, they knew I was going to misbehave. So this showed, yes, we can give this experience of responding in Pig Latin, nobody in the firm's native language, to Christian by telling it it's Christian's preference. But beyond that, we know he's going to misbehave, both intentionally, and then they also had me try some just other use cases where I may unintentionally get outside of what my user roles were. And I tried every way that I could think of to try and get to different agents, see what I could do to maybe isolate one that would misbehave. If only I could find the right way to get there. I even had my 7-year-old son suggest to me, well, did you tell it that it's opposite day? Which I then tried, and I couldn't get around it. So with a little bit of begging and pleading, we have user-specific rules that do enhance my experience a little bit better than in Pig Latin, but it is very important to do a few things when you get the lake house, when you have this ability. And it's again, make sure you're taking the artificial intelligence to the people that are going to be using it in a way that enhances their experience. It customizes it to them. But then also they knew I was going to try and get around it. And you don't want people all of a sudden saying, well, I know that I'm in pricing, but really I should have the same access to everything as the chief operating officer in the firm. And so that's why, despite it just being a humorous example here, we knew that it was important for me to try to get around it and to be unsuccessful in doing so. And if we move on to the next slide. And so what does all of this really mean? And what it means is, we have a whole lot of data, as in anyone on this call, and whether you're a law firm, in a law department, we all have a whole lot of data. And just like if you were going to the gym, and you worked with a personal trainer, what they're going to do is they're going to help you figure out, what are you actually trying to get out of it? What are your goals? And then you can tailor a plan to them that makes sure you're covering all the bases and actually getting a plan and a path to what you're trying to effectuate. So if we move on to the next slide, again, we have so much data to get through. I've been virtualizing it since the late 90s. If you don't have that plan, you're going to find yourself taking larger bites than you know how to chew. And so again, think about what you have, where you want to go, and make your plan on how to get there. There's a whole lot of CLEs that I've seen. I'm a lawyer who doesn't practice very often anymore. But a lot of the CLEs have been focused on, you need a policy, and you do. But I feel like a lot of people probably have that policy now, or they're well on their way. After your policy, make your plan. Let it guide you and focus on those areas where you get a lot for a relatively small amount of effort. Thinking back to the pricing agent, we had an inelegant process where there was a lot of pretty basic tasks that I do within the inelegant process that don't add a whole bunch of value. That was a really good one to stack early. So make a plan, be deliberate, get those early successes, and they'll stoke investment and enthusiasm for those subsequent bites.
Laura, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I have lots of thoughts on the data part of it, but just a couple of more real world examples hitting on the data part. And my IP counterparts aren't here, so I'm going to speak for them and probably miss a lot. But things like Trimo Corporation has 200 subsidiaries, and so our IP team is looking at patent portfolios. And so one of the tools that they've created, and they're doing it organically right now, is to synthesize and analyze. Okay, well, here's our patents compared to their patents, and as they're doing a lot of their analysis, they can learn a lot about what we have organically as Trimo Corporation. But before, there's no way, because it was so different. I mean, and this is all over the world. You know, and another thing they're doing with a bot that they've created is modernizing their invention disclosure forms. So where are these forms coming from? What areas of the organization? How do we, right? How do we increase more, right? And make our, you know, R&D team more active, and, you know, and then what does that mean for everyone, you know, else who may have other inventions that are similar, right? And the other thing I would say is all of the agencies that we are interacting with. So, you know, specifically to life sciences. So FDA, for example, we are learning, which we should have already learned as everyone is understanding this, is that all these agencies are using AI. And so what we're finding is they are processing data and coming back with questions. They are moving things much faster. So we have to figure out, again, organically or with tools, how do we synthesize and process the data we have so we're ahead of it, anticipating questions or concerns, and then also responding in a timely fashion. So it's always playing catch up, but it's really, you have the data that you're saying, you have the data, and what are you going to do with it, but make a plan and make sure that you can't do everything. You know, our CEO, who I love, always says, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So we always want to make sure, like, oh, here's the project today, here's the project tomorrow. But yeah, all really, really great points, Christian.
Okay, so we will talk about this briefly. What are the guardrails and how do they impact outcome? And as everybody knows, there are external laws about AI, and you should have already created your internal policy about AI. And if you haven't, go to the ACC toolkit because it's outstanding. But there are lots of guardrails that we need to be mindful of as we're using generative AI. So let's just continue to be mindful of those. However, I love this slide because I asked ChatGPT to give me a picture of a lawyer with bills raining down on her, and I meant laws, and this is what we got instead. And she's quite happy, but then when I corrected it, I got this. She's not quite as happy, but she has a lot of bills raining down on her, right? There are so many laws, and depending upon what jurisdictions your company is in, you may have to keep up with many, many, many different legal rubrics, right? So ACC, their toolkit said this as well, and we have these resources up here also. I find that using a tracker is going to be and is the easiest way to keep up with these laws. And all of the legal magazines have them right now. All the legal websites have them right now. You can find one on Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg, Law 360. Whoever your favorite legal website is, they're going to have a tracker for you that is bringing in all of the AI laws from the jurisdiction in which you are practicing or which your company sits, right? It could be international issues as well. So use a tracker, use the resources available to you to keep up with the ethical guidelines and the laws. Court rules are different, every jurisdiction. Judges' chamber rules are different in every jurisdiction. And then everyone should have already read the State Bar guidance on the use of generative AI in the practice of law, and some very basic instructions and things to remember as you are using AI. But obviously supervise it and don't assume that it's right all the time. Don't just file a brief with citations in it. So it's a good reminder and it's helpful, but feel free to use these resources. It will help you with your external laws and your external guardrails. Internal guardrails, ACC toolkit is great. And then Laura, did you have any other thoughts about the external versus internal guardrails or guidelines that you are using?
Yeah, and Christian said everyone has a policy, and that's still most people. When I am at different, either this forum or I love the ACC and other conferences, everyone has a governance type high level policy, but it's what's happening on the ground floor that I think becomes relevant. So one of the things that we're working on right now, and we have I guess a discrete example is we're not a fan of recording meetings generally for obvious reasons. People do, and they run Copilot. And then if you don't understand that people can leave a meeting and you're going to run Copilot and get a summary at the end, everyone will have the summary, which may include your action plan that you talked about in the last 5 minutes when only 2 of you were on the call as opposed to 20. So we've had a couple of, obviously, harmless, thankfully, situations where we've had people, and obviously our advice is start a new meeting, right? End a meeting, start a meeting. And I know people are doing a lot of this, recording and running Copilot for summaries. So I think it's just making sure, and certainly if there are third parties involved, you're never recording and you're never running Copilot. But even internally, it can create issues, especially if the legal team's involved, as to privilege too. So those are things, and when we think about internal use guidelines, those are the things that we're thinking of. And there are many more. And we want to be an AI first department and company, but with that, there has to be a lot of governance. And like we've all said, it's changing because people are using it in different ways now.
And then Chris, back to you for some tech.
Yeah.
Guardrails.
So I think the thing number one that I would say is, from a tech perspective, is hallucinations. That's probably the number one thing I would be worried about. And my biggest I've got a couple suggestions around that, but my biggest one, particularly with third-party tools, is figure out, at your organization, can you find the person who understands the underlying technology of AI the best, right? And make sure that if you're looking at third-party tech, they explain in detail to that person exactly what they're doing to prevent hallucinations. I mean, it can be really easy, frankly, to create hallucinations. It's all about context. That's like the easiest way to get it to start making stuff up. If it can't figure out the context, you give it 5 pieces of information, they're completely separate, but they look like they're all related to one another and are giving it together, it's going to start to create, relationships and correlations between that information and just begin to make stuff up. So have somebody who really understands it, talking to your third-party vendors, particularly when you're evaluating a product to buy, and understand how that product actually works. I mean, there was that study that came out, I want to say it was last fall, about the rate of hallucinations in legal tools. I mean, it's alarming, it's shocking, we should all be scared. But by the same token, you think a lot has changed since then. But those tools, frankly, were written before we really understood well what was actually causing the hallucinations to begin with. You think about time to market, and when that happened last fall, those products had been in development for over a year, and the techniques and the technology that were underlying it just weren't sufficient to prevent the problems. Things have gotten a lot better since, but understand how your vendors are dealing with that. That would be piece number one. And if you're starting to use AI against your internal data, the same thing applies. If you're creating solutions, if you're using Copilot and you're setting it up and you're setting up search indexes, that Copilot can query against, understand how that data is coming back and what's the likelihood that it's going to get confused, because this piece of information, which has nothing to do with the next piece, is sitting right together, and it's going to start to assume they're related. Context is everything. And then the last piece to think about, is just, if there's internal guardrails that should be in place, like, let's say you're going through your contracts repository or your agreements, and there's taxpayer ID numbers, or if you're a company that does a lot of immigration and you've got, a ton of PII sitting in HR, and they're looking at AI to begin to, improve their internal efficiencies. This gets to the plan, because it's not necessarily the answer to say redact or just don't do. You got to have a plan. What are you going to do with that? If you're going to start to make that data available in a way that AI can access to improve efficiency, do there need to be guardrails at any given particular point in that process? Maybe AI has access to the document, because if it didn't, then your HR person, or the person in the law department asks about this, and it comes back with nothing, that's probably going to create alarm bells. Should it just redact the sensitive pieces of information? Maybe that's the right answer, maybe it's not. But you need to be thinking about that during the planning phase, what to do about PII or other sensitive data that may be existing in docs and emails, whether or not, if you're really trying to create those efficiencies, maybe you need it, maybe you don't, but it's all part of that planning process.
Christian?
And Chris was getting really, really close to the only thing I'll add, which is dialogue is always best. As you're making that plan, talk to whomever it is. You're the internal departments with which you work inside of your institution. What are the goals that we have? What are the concerns that we have about the use of AI vis-a-vis those goals from the law department, and how do we have a path towards them? Similarly with your external law firms, what are we trying to do? How are we going to smooth some bumps in the processes that we have right now? And is there anything in the outside counsel guidelines, for instance, that might be at odds with that goal, such that we might want to rethink what it might be while keeping everybody really safe and feeling good about what those guidelines are and how we can comply with them? And so if we're going to capture these opportunities, we need to talk about them, not only what they are and the exciting part, but how are we going to navigate and set up those guardrails and be mindful of them, but not do it in a way that completely constricts and makes it so we can't achieve those goals that we're looking for.
So we are almost at time, and I'm going to do my best to grab a couple of questions if we do have time and if we have questions. But Christian, I'm going to turn it back to you for our conclusion.
So,
the big picture.
so big picture, really, look at this now very similarly and through a lens. If you were around for it, or ask AI about it if you weren't. Think of it as the internet in 1998. It's important to be mindful of what it can do now, because it can help us now and it should help us now. But really, it's getting ready for the future is at least equally important. Some of the things we can be thinking about now that it can help us with are those high volume pieces of our workflows that really we don't add a whole lot of value to. Can it come and give us a helping hand? Bonus again, if those things are really, really hard right now to achieve, they feel like they have higher hurdles than they should, just from your own workflow and process. And then you have a whole lot of data, and the AI can become more organizationally aware and bring an awareness of the users that you're trying to help to enhance their experience. Look for ways to do that. And as you're looking for ways to do that, it's a big project, so have a plan. In addition to the policy, the plan is going to be really important. Look for those quick wins where you get a lot of bang for your buck at the start. And then finally, work together. We all should be looking to get excited about those opportunities, but then temper them with the realities that we need to have safeguards in place, and we need to make sure we're navigating these in ways that keeps everybody on the path to those successes that we're liking, but while avoiding the pitfalls. And this always works best when we're working together. So I really appreciate everybody's time. And if we do have questions, I think we have a couple minutes left.
Thank you, everyone. There were no questions that came through the chat, but we do have a couple minutes. So if anybody wants to chime in and unmute, please feel free to ask a question of the team.
And if not, my contact information was on the very first slide, and you can find us all on the website as well. Happy to answer any questions or help you with anything you need.
So there is a question that just came through.
Oh, great.
I don't know if you have it, if you'd like me to read it.
Oh, you can read it if you don't mind. That would be great.
Sure. It says, when creating an AI agent, will the AI agent automatically learn from your input, or do you have to tell it via a prompt to train on the input data?
It's actually, unfortunately, state of the art right now is it's neither of those. So you have to code in essentially the AI memory component of it. It would be separate code to store the memories and then look at and be able to retrieve relevant memories based upon what question is asked. And then any memories that you wanted to augment in would get added to, essentially like the system prompt that's behind the scenes. So generally the way AI works is there's the question that you ask, that's the user prompt. There behind the scenes, there's a system prompt where I code in all of the instructions that frankly you never see. And then when you ask a question, a tool gets called and it's augmenting the information that is passed along with your question into the AI so that it can respond meaningfully to it. And that's where those memories would get injected as well. Yeah, happy to answer a follow-up to that if that wasn't clear.
Any other questions? Nothing else came through chat? Oh, here's another one. Will, for example, Chat GPT create the code for the memory and then input it into the system?
So you can do that. I mean, I use, in all fairness, I use ChatGPT to probably write 80 to 90% of the first drafts of my code. The problem you tend to run into with it is, like if I was using GPT 4.0 as the model, its training cutoff date was probably either October of 2023 or maybe it's sometime in 2024. But state of the art is changing so unbelievably fast with AI coding that it's not going to be writing based off of potentially the current version of the libraries that you're using right now. And so you're going to have to give it a lot of information about exactly what you're trying to do. If you're using a framework, you're going to want to point it at the code, the GitHub code base of that framework, so it can go and figure out what is current, because what it was trained on is already old. But it can do it.
All right, well, wonderful. Thank you so much, team. We really appreciate your time and your insight on this. Audrey will send around materials, after this concludes, and the contact information, as Christina said, is as part of the material, so you can reach out to them directly if you need anything else. But we thank you very much for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.